The snow hit the windshield hard enough to sound like gravel. Wipers scraped in that tired rubber rhythm, smearing white instead of clearing it. My hands were locked at 10 and 2, knuckles aching, heater blasting lukewarm air that never reached my boots. 3 hours for turkey, I muttered. This bird better be worth it. The GPS said I was 4 minutes out. The sky had that bruised purple look it got right before it swallowed the last of the light. I could feel the familiar knot between my shoulders, the mix of leave guilt and marriage guilt and don't crash the rental car. When I turned onto the cul-de-sac, the first thing that hit me was the dark. Everyone else's houses were warm squares of yellow against the snow. Chase's childhood home, our house now on paper, sat black and unwelcoming, a hulking shadow with a dusting of white on the roof and no porch light. I frowned. Victor always left the porch light on? Always. I parked at the curb, engine ticking, and the cold slapped me the second I opened the door. Breath fogged out, sharp in my lungs. Snow squeaked under my boots as I jogged up the walkway, overnight bag bumping my hip. The key stuck in the front lock like it hadn't been turned in weeks. Come on, I hissed, jamming my shoulder into the door. It gave with a low groan. The air that spilled out smelled wrong. Not just no one cooked yet wrong. Heavy, sour wrong. The stink of stale cigarettes, mildew, and something human and acidic underneath. A draft curled around my legs like fingers. I stepped inside and swore softly. It was freezing. My breath puffed in front of my face in the foyer. I dropped my bag, flipped the light switch by habit. Nothing. I fumbled for my phone, thumb lighting the screen, flashlight slicing a weak cone into the darkness. Chase? I called Vic? No answer. The quiet wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the padded, smothered quiet of a room that's given up expecting voices. I moved toward the living room, boots crunching faintly on grit I couldn't see. The beam of my phone caught on the thermostat on the wall. I crossed to it, wiping a thumb over the dusty plastic. 52 to GF glowed in bleak blue numbers. My stomach dropped. Victor hated the cold. A shape loomed ahead on the couch. Slumped. Gray. Wrong. Victor, I said. No answer. I crossed the room fast, the smell hitting me before my flashlight did. Urine. Old sweat. Skin that hadn't seen soap in too long. He sat in his recliner, not the couch, I realized. Hunched sideways, a thin fleece blanket tangled around his legs, pajama top hanging open over a bony chest. His hair was matted to his head with sweat. His lips had a faint blue tinge, and his hands trembled where they clutched at the armrests. His pants and the chair cushion beneath him glistened in the light, stained dark and crusted. Jesus, Victor, I breathed. His eyelids fluttered at the sound of my voice, then creaked open. For a second, the eyes I knew, sharp, stubborn, flared. Riley? He rasped, voice shredded. That you, girl? Yeah, it's me. My training snapped into place so hard it hurt. Voice calm, body moving faster. Hey, I've got you. I dropped to a knee beside the chair, the cold from the floor biting through denim. His skin, when I touched his wrist, was icy. His pulse was thready, racing to keep up. How long you been like this? I asked, already scanning. Livid bruises on his forearms. Skin breakdown at his hips where the blanket had rubbed raw. No space heater. No medical equipment. Just an old man in a cold house sinking. His breath stuttered. Got cold, he wheezed. She turned. Heat down. Said, Bills. She. Linda. My jaw clenched. Where's Chase? I said. Where's your wife? His eyes fluttered again. A tear tracked sideways across his temple, disappearing into greasy hair. Gone, he whispered. Said, you'd handle it. Handle it. I straightened, every cell in my body humming now. Okay, I said. We're going to warm you up, get you cleaned, and then we're going to have a little look around. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fridge in the distance, but it sounded wrong too. Thin, intermittent. I ran to the kitchen. The LCD on the stove clock was dark. The fridge light flicked on, dim, when I opened the door. almost empty. Half a bottle of ketchup, a jar of pickles, milk 2 days past labeled date. No prepared meals, no trays, no leftovers. On the counter sat a note. I recognized Chase's messy print the way he never finished his lines. Riley, we went on the cruise. Couldn't get a refund. You're better at this stuff anyway. Just handle him. Back in 10 days. Love ya. See and Mom. My vision tunneled for a second. Underneath the note sat an envelope with my name and Linda's small, tight script. I tore it open with my thumb. A bank slip fluttered into my palm. Available balance, $43.17. I knew with cold, precise certainty that 3 months ago that account had held $14,000. Roof fund, combat pay, saved pennies. My phone vibrated in my hand. Instagram notification. Out of reflex, I glanced. At Hannah Cole XO tagged at Chase Mitch 21 in her story. I tapped. A photo filled the screen. Chase on a ship deck under a blue sky, drink in hand, sunglasses on, arms slung around a tanned, much younger woman in a bikini. Caption, thankful for this man and this view. Blessed. My fingers went numb. Behind me from the living room, Victor coughed weakly. The sound snapped me back. I backed out of the kitchen, heart pounding, and grabbed the throw blankets from the back of the couch, thin, but better than nothing until I could do better. Okay, Vic, I said, forcing my voice into that medic tone, steady, even, the one I'd used in dust-choked rooms and roadside ditches. We're going to triage the situation. I wrapped the blankets around his torso, tucking them in tight, then jogged down the hall to the bathroom, flipping the light on. The bathroom reeked of ammonia and mildew. Towels were balled in the corner, stiff with old stains. I turned the tub tap on, waited for the water to go from icy to lukewarm. No time for warm comfort, just enough to clean and slowly bring his core temp up. On the medicine cabinet shelf, several bottles sat in a neat row. I snatched up the orange one with his name and morphine on the label. The liquid inside sloshed clear, not the viscous, syrupy consistency I'd seen 100 times. I unscrewed the cap and sniffed. Chlorinated flatness. Tap water. My stomach lurched. Linda, I whispered, rage curling the name into something ugly. You absolute... I cut it off. Anger later. Mission now. I capped the bottle, dried my hands on my jeans, and set it carefully on the counter away from splash. Evidence some clinical part of my brain cataloged. Preserve condition. Chain of custody. I grabbed cleanish washcloths from the back of the cabinet, ran them under the lukewarm stream, wrung them out. Back in the living room, Victor shivered under the blankets, teeth chattering weakly. I checked his forehead again. Cooler now, but still clammy. Riley, he murmured. You shouldn't see me like this. I've seen worse than this, I said, and you'd be the first to tell me to stop being sentimental and get to work. A faint ghost of his old smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. That's true, he whispered. I slid the washcloth gently along his neck, behind his ears, down his chest, cleaning away sweat and grime, and the sticky residue of neglect. He winced at first, then sagged into it, eyes closing. As I worked, my brain split in two. One half counted breaths, tracked color, recalculated the balance between hypothermia and shock. Do we need an ambulance? Can he survive a ride in this state? Is the faster help worth the transit stress when I'm literally trained for battlefield medicine? The other half built a timeline. Last text from Chase. Can't wait to see you, babe. Mom says she's got Victor handled. Last bank transfer, 3 weeks ago. Me wiring another $500. Cruise tag posted, 2 hours earlier. Morphine bottle diluted. Unknown, but based on his pain levels and the level on the label versus reality, at least days. Abandoned house, no heat, no food, no sitter, no plan. They hadn't just gone on vacation. They'd left a dying man as if he were an unplugged appliance, assuming I'd show up and plug myself into the wall instead. Riley, Victor rasped, eyes half open, pupils glassy but focused. You still here? Yeah, I said softly, squeezing his hand. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Did they leave? I could have lied. He already knew. Yes, I said, they did. The tear leaked from the corner of his eye, trailing into his hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought she loved. His breath hitched. Hey, I cut in, leaning closer. Do not apologize for someone else's failure, you hear me? You gave her a home, you tried. I gestured around us. This is on them, not you. His fingers clenched weakly around mine. You always were better, judge of character, he whispered. Not by much, I said. I married her son, remember? That pulled a ragged, breathless chuckle from him. Point taken, he rasped. I dabbed at his face with the cloth, soothing as best I could. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the cold hummed through the vents like a threat. I glanced at the thermostat again. 52 degrees. I thought of every house I'd visited in bad neighborhoods as a kid, carrying grocery bags for mom, seeing people make do with what they had. This wasn't poverty. This was choice to die. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb flying. First, 911, quiet, calm, asking for a welfare check and transport, giving my credentials, making it clear I knew his baseline MULST and DNR. Then, a second call to a number I'd saved under Karen Holt, estate months ago when Victor had insisted I never ignore a banker's advice. Karen Holt, the voice answered, crisp and alert despite the late hour. Ms. Holt, this is Staff Sergeant Riley Foster, I said. I'm with Victor Harmon. He's alive for now, but I need you to see what I'm seeing. I angled the phone, panning slowly across the room. Victor bundled in thin fleece, the ruined recliner, the dark windows, my own breath clouding in the air. Good God, she breathed. Riley, what happened? I looked at Victor's frail face, at the note on the counter, at the morphine bottle full of tap water waiting on the bathroom sink. Ma'am, I said, my voice settling into the calm I used on the radio in firefights. Short version? They took my money and his comfort and left us both to freeze. I met my own reflected eyes in the black TV screen. I'm going to stabilize him, I said, and then we're going to war. Victor's fingers squeezed mine again, faint but deliberate. Girl, he whispered. His eyes closed. The siren in the distance began to wail, a thin, rising sound threading through the snow. I adjusted the blankets around him, my breath fogging in front of my face, and felt the mission click into place. This wasn't the battlefield I expected to fight on, but I knew exactly how to move in this kind of valley. The paramedics brought the heat with them. The door banged open on a gust of snow and diesel, heavy boots thudding on the floor. Their radios crackled as they stepped into the freezing air, fogging instantly. EMS! A voice called. Where's our guy? In here, I answered, already moving to meet them. 69-year-old male, terminal cancer, likely sepsis and hypothermia. Core temp low, no active bleeding. I'm Staff Sergeant Foster, Army medic. The lead medic, mid-40s, tired eyes, knit cap under his helmet, took one look at Victor and swore softly. Damn, he muttered. How long's he been like this? Long enough, I said. Heat's been off, no food in the fridge, no caregiver present. Family left town. He gave me a sharp look at that but didn't comment. He flicked his flashlight over Victor's face, then under the blanket. Okay, sir, he said to Victor, voice gentler. We're gonna get you warmed up and out of this freezer, all right? Victor's eyelids fluttered. About damn time, he whispered. That got a faint smile out of all of us. They slipped an oxygen cannula under his nose, slid a thermometer into his ear, and winced at the reading. Damn near popsicle, one muttered. We going central? The younger one asked. Yeah, the lead said. Get the warming blankets going in the rig. As they worked, I hovered in that thin line between professional and personal. I handed them vitals notes I'd scribbled on the back of an old mail flyer. Pulse, respirations, my estimate of his temp before they got their official reading. They asked how long since he'd eaten, what his baseline status was. I answered with the precision of someone who'd sat through oncology consults and pored over mollusc forms at a kitchen table. His PCP is Dr. Anders, I added. He's DNR, but he wanted comfort care. Not this. I didn't look at the stain on the chair when I said it. They bundled him onto the gurney in one practiced lift, the thin blanket and my extra throws wrapped tight around him. His hand flopped out, groping. I caught it. "Riley," he rasped. "Don't. Let them—" "I won't," I said, squeezing back. "You focus on breathing. I'll handle the rest." His eyes met mine, lucid and fierce for a heartbeat. "Should have adopted you," he whispered. Something hot and painful slid behind my ribs. "Too late now," I said softly. "You're stuck with me anyway." They rolled him out into the snow, wheels bumping over the front step. The night swallowed them, red and blue lights flashing against the white, siren a low moan as the doors slammed. The house fell quiet again. Not peaceful. Just empty. I stood in the center of the living room, hands hanging useless for a second, listening to the echo of the stretcher wheels. The smell was still there. Urine, cold air, missed days. I took a slow breath through my mouth and forced myself to move. Heat up first. I went to the basement to flip the breaker for the furnace, fingers numb on the metal handle. The unit coughed, shuddered, and finally whirred to life like an old dog roused from the floor. Upstairs, the vents started to exhale faintly warmer air. Too late for tonight. But not too late for the record. I walked the house with my phone on video. Thermostat, empty pantry, stained recliner, morphine bottle, note on the counter. Each image another line in a report my brain was already writing. Years earlier, I'd walked a very different house with Victor at my elbow. Back then, the place had smelled like lemon oil and coffee. He'd moved slower than his banking days, but with purpose, cane tapping on hardwood. "These things tell you more than any speech," he'd said, hand rapping lightly on the wood trim. "How someone cares for what they're given. That's the real ledger." I'd been fresh back from my first deployment, still half-wired for sand and cordite. He'd found me staring at my online bank balance one night, trying to stretch combat pay into something that looked like a future. "You're doing this backwards," he'd said, pulling my laptop away. "Stop fixating on the number. Start paying attention to habits." He'd taught me how to build a budget spreadsheet, how to automate savings into a separate account you pretend doesn't exist, how to read an investment statement without getting lost in jargon. "They'll always want you to believe you're bad with money," he'd said, meaning my husband, my parents, the world. "Because if you believe that, they get to be the hero. Don't hand them that power." It was ironic, standing in his cold, neglected house now, realizing he'd hidden that same lesson inside his life. He'd always said Linda hated paperwork. Now I understood that was exactly why he'd never put her in charge of any that mattered. I finished the video sweep and took still shots of the morphine bottle's label. The pharmacy name, the doctor, the dosage, the fill date. Then I cracked the front door and crossed the narrow strip of lawn to the neighbor's house, snow squeaking under my boots again. Mrs. Clark answered before I even knocked twice. She was half in a cardigan, half out of it, gray hair piled on top of her head, reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Riley?" she said, blinking. "I thought that was your car. Honey, I am so glad you're here." Her warm kitchen hit me like a wave. Cinnamon, dish soap, a pot of something simmering. "EMS just took Victor," I said. "He's hypothermic, dehydrated. The heat was off. There was nothing." Her mouth tightened. "I called Linda last week," she said. "Told her the house looked dark. Asked if they needed a hand. She said they had it under control and to mind my own porch." "Did you see anyone go in or out?" I asked. "Any caregivers? Nurses?" She shook her head, cheeks flushing with anger. "Just Chase and some young thing with a suitcase," she said. "Two suitcases, actually. This morning. They were laughing. He said something like, 'The old man prefers quiet. He doesn't need all the drama.'" She huffed. "I thought about calling you," she admitted. "I had your number on a card Victor showed me once, said, 'This one's more my daughter than anyone else.' But I didn't want to overstep. I should have overstepped." "You're stepping just fine now," I said. "Would you be willing to talk to a lawyer? Maybe the police later? Just to say what you saw and heard?" She straightened, an old schoolteacher's spine showing under the shawl. "I will talk to whoever needs talking to," she said. "I've been watching this foolishness too long." On the counter, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Stay warm, I told her. I need to go to the hospital. EMS took him to Central. She nodded, then reached out and gripped my hand. You're not alone in this, dear, she said. Some of us have eyes. The words lodged in my chest like a small torch. Back at the house, I grabbed my bag, double-checked that I had my wallet and ID, snapped one last photo of the thermostat, and slipped the watered morphine bottle into a plastic grocery sack tied tight. Chains of custody, I reminded myself. Paper trails, receipts. The snow had thickened, soft flakes blurring the streetlights, by the time I pulled out of the cul-de-sac. My tires crunched through the fresh layer, wipers squeaking. The hospital ER smelled like every ER, antiseptic, sweat, stale coffee, fear. They had him in a curtained bay, warmed blankets piled high, a heated air hose snaking under the stack. Machines beeped in that deceptively steady rhythm that only felt comforting if you didn't know how fast it could tilt. Victor's face looked less gray, more yellow. Still bad. Less dying on a cold chair bad. Dr. Anders stood at the foot of the bed, flipping through his chart on a tablet. He looked up when he saw me. Staff Sergeant Foster, he said. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Same, sir, I said. He nodded toward the blankets. You found him? He asked. In a 52-degree house with no heat and no food sitting in his own waste, I said. My tone came out flatter than I intended. No caregiver, no family. He said they left. Anders' mouth went thin. I've been trying to reach Linda for weeks, he said. Appointments canceled, med refills delayed. Every time I called, she assured me he was fine and that she'd bring him in when the ice melted. There hasn't been ice in 2 months. I held up the plastic sack. I think you'll want to see this, I said. He peeled the grocery bag open, took the morphine bottle out, and turned it in his fingers. Light from the overhead fixture glinted through the clear liquid. He frowned, unscrewed the cap, sniffed, then swirled it. Damn, he said softly. This is water. Could you run a lab on it? I asked. Chain of custody, official-like? I can report it up my channels too, but he deserves more than hearsay. He nodded, jaw clenched. I'll walk it down myself, he said. This is felony territory. He glanced at Victor, then back at me. Thank you for catching this, he added, and for getting him out of that house. I should have come sooner, I said. Riley, Victor croaked from under the blankets, eyes slitting open. Stop blaming yourself. His voice was weak, but the old command tone threaded through it. Listen to the man, Anders said gently. He's still my sharpest patient. Victor shifted his gaze to the doctor. Need my lawyer, he murmured. Karen. Today. Now. She's on her way, I said. I called her from the house. She saw things. He relaxed a fraction. Good, he whispered. Time to balance. The books. Hours blurred. Nurses came and went, adjusting lines, checking vitals. The warm air hose hummed. The heater in the ER rumbled overhead, making the thin curtain wall shiver. Karen arrived in a navy wool coat, hair damp from the snow, leather portfolio under one arm. The sound of her boots on the linoleum was brisk, purposeful. Staff Sergeant, she greeted me quietly. I saw the videos you sent. I've already started a file. Her eyes flicked to Victor, softening. How are we feeling, Mr. Harmon? She asked, stepping to his bedside. He huffed a ghost of a laugh. Like hell, he rasped. But focused. Always the banker, she said. You wanted to see me? His hand crept out from under the blankets, fingers groping. I stepped closer, letting him grip mine again, grounding him while Karen leaned in, tablet ready. Remember, he said, voice shredded, what I told you about the other account. Karen's brows rose just perceptibly. Yes, she said, I remember. She glanced at me. Does she know? He asked, tilting his chin toward me. Not yet, Karen said. You weren't ready when we last spoke. He swallowed painfully, throat working. Ready now? He whispered. Tell her Everything. He turned his head on the pillow, eyes locking onto mine with a spark that cut through the fog. They took your money, he said. Time to show them. They never had mine. My fingers tightened around his, pulse ticking in my ears. What other account? I asked slowly. Victor's lips quirked, the hint of a familiar sly smile. The one your husband doesn't know exists, he said. 3 million so's only reasons. I chose the right daughter. Karen's stylus hovered over the glass, waiting. The monitors beeped on. The snow kept falling outside. And somewhere over open water, my husband ordered another drink, confident he'd left a broke medic and a helpless old man behind. He had no idea the real ledger had just changed hands. By the time Karen and I sat down in the family consult room, my eyes felt like sandpaper. The little room was all beige walls and humming fluorescent lights, the kind of space where families found out their lives had quietly rearranged without their consent. It smelled like coffee, printer toner, and old worry. Karen set her leather portfolio on the table, flipped it open, and slid a thin stack of papers toward me. Victor is a meticulous man, she said. Even when his body started to fail, his paperwork did not. My fingers smoothed the top page out of habit. The header of an investment firm I'd only ever seen on commercials stared back at me, followed by columns of numbers that didn't belong to a man living on just a pension and Social Security. Bottom line, $370,000 and change. My throat went dry. I don't understand, I said. He always acted like the house and his monthly pension check were all there was. Linda talked about bills constantly. Chase said they were barely scraping by. Karen's mouth flattened. They were scraping by on what he allowed them access to, she said. Victor spent 40 years managing other people's money. He watched more than one spouse burn through an inheritance in a year. He knew what greed looks like in a portfolio. She tapped the page. This is a revocable living trust he set up years ago after he married Linda, she explained, designed so that if she proved herself a good steward, she would be looked after. If not, she spread her hands. He made other plans. The air conditioner hummed overhead, uselessly cold for a man who'd just been pulled out of a meat locker. Right now, she went on, the trust leaves the house and most assets to Linda with Chase as contingent beneficiary. Victor has talked to me about his reservations before, but he hesitated to change anything. He hoped they would improve. She looked me squarely in the eye. Seeing your video, the state he was in? Her jaw tightened. That hesitation is gone. I thought of Linda's tight smile, her manicured hands waving away offers of help, Chase's half-serious jokes about Victor's life insurance as their ticket out. Rage crawled up my spine like a rash. I want them nowhere near this, I said. My voice came out low and even, the way it did on the radio when rounds were still incoming. Not the money, not the house, not the decisions. Karen nodded, unsurprised. We can execute an amendment, she said, as long as he's still competent. It will have to be done quickly, documented thoroughly, and witnessed by people other than you. Is he competent? I asked. He'd been lucid with me. Then he'd drifted, eyes fogging, breath rattling. Yes, she said. He has good moments and bad. We only need him clear and consistent long enough to understand and sign. We'll video record the explanation and his consent. Dr. Anders can attest to capacity. She slid a second document across the table. This one was thinner, the language sharper. This is a draft of the amendment he and I discussed months ago but never executed, she said. 50% of the trust to a veterans foundation he trusts, 50% plus the house to you, as beneficiary and trustee. Jian, the word swam for a second. To me, I said. You're the only one who's consistently shown up, she said simply. His words, not mine. My hand drifted unconsciously to the dog tags under my shirt. I wasn't angling for this, I said, because some part of me still felt like I had to disclaim that. I know, she said. That's why he chose you. She unsnapped a pen from the folder and placed it beside the amendment. Do you consent to being named trustee and beneficiary? She asked. It's not just money. It's responsibility, oversight, taxes, headaches. I thought of the way Victor had taught me to read a budget, of the napkin spreadsheets and late-night calls from Afghanistan when I'd asked if I was making the right moves. I thought of him in that chair, skin gray, whispering, "Time to balance the books." Yes, I said, I consent. She nodded once, businesslike. Then we need to get his consent on camera, she said. Tonight, if possible. Back in Victor's bay, the lights were dimmed. His skin had more color, but his breaths were shallower. That unsettling Cheney-Stokes pattern I'd seen in too many hospice rooms, long pauses, then a burst of air, like a body arguing with itself about staying. Anders stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, watching the monitors. How are we? I asked quietly. He's stabilized enough for now, Anders said. We've warmed him, started antibiotics, fluids. He nodded at the monitor pattern. This is his disease, not the cold. The cold just hurried the schedule. Is he clear? Karen asked. Anders studied Victor's face, then leaned in. Mr. Harmon, he said. Victor, it's Dr. Anders. Can you tell me who's in the room with you? Victor's eyelids cracked. He scanned slowly. Doc, he rasped. The lawyer. And my girl. His eyes found me, Riley. And where are we? Anders prompted. Hospital, Victor said. Not my damn freezer. And the year? He frowned. 2023, he managed. Feels longer. Anders nodded. Competent, he said softly to Karen. Exhausted, but competent. Karen pulled out her phone, propping it on a little cardboard stand the nurse had dug up from the station. This is Karen Holt, she said for the recording, her voice shifting into formal cadence. I'm here with my client, Mr. Victor Harmon, and his physician, Dr. Anders, and his caregiver, Staff Sergeant Riley Foster. Mr. Harmon, I need to ask you some questions on camera about your estate. Are you okay with that? Victor huffed weakly. Hit me, he whispered. She walked him through every point, who currently stood to inherit, what he'd told her about their behavior, what he'd seen tonight. When she asked, do you want to change your trust so that your wife, Linda, and your stepson, Chase, receive nothing? He didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, voice barely audible. Intentionally nothing. And who do you want to be your primary beneficiary and trustee? She asked. His eyes slid to me and softened. Riley, he said. She showed up. Karen had to pause for a moment to compose herself. Do you understand what this means? She pressed gently. That they will have no legal claim? That you are choosing to leave your estate to her and to the charity instead of them? Yes, he whispered. They made their choices. This is mine. He lifted a trembling hand slightly, fingers opening. I stepped closer, took it, let him anchor to my grip. Karen turned the camera slightly, capturing our hands. Why Riley? She asked. He took a ragged breath. Because she sat in the cold with me, he said. Because she earned it in every phone call, every visit, every dollar she saved when they spent hers. The words tore at something inside me and stitched something else back together at the same time. Karen stopped the recording, blinking fast. All right, she said. We'll keep this with the amendment and the notary video. The hospital's on-call notary arrived with red eyes and a coffee stain down one sleeve, clearly pulled from bed. She checked his ID, verified the date and time, and watched his hand struggle across the page. When the pen slid, I steadied it with my fingers under his, careful not to guide, just support. The signature was shaky. It was his. The notary stamped the amendment with a sharp thunk that sounded too loud in the small space. Congratulations, Mr. Harmon, Karen said softly. You've just executed your last piece of estate planning. He gave her a shadow of his old banker's grin. Always did like a good closing, he wheezed. He looked at me then. Mission accomplished, he whispered. His grip on my hand loosened. I squeezed back. Not yet, I said. We still have to deliver the consequences. One corner of his mouth lifted. Wish I could see their faces. Oh, I said, voice going flat with something that wasn't quite humor. I have plans for that part. Hours blurred into each other in the chair by his bed. I dozed in snatches, the hard vinyl digging into my shoulders, the rhythmic beep of monitors syncing with the phantom thump of rotors in my memory. At some point in the gray between night and dawn, he woke just enough to say my name one more time. Riley. I'm here, I murmured, leaning in. Thank you, he whispered, for coming home. His fingers twitched against mine. His chest rose, fell, then didn't rise again. The monitor tones shifted into a flat, unwavering line. I'd heard it too many times in too many places. It still cut. Anders came, listened, watched, nodded. Time of death was recorded in a voice that sounded colder than any thermostat. They removed the tubing, shut off the machines, left the room humming with only the faint whir of the heating vent. I sat with him for a long time, holding a hand that was already cooling. He looked smaller without the lines and wires, like some essential part of his stubbornness had left with his last breath. Rest easy, I said quietly. I've got the rest. On my way out, I stopped at the nurse's station and signed the paperwork for direct cremation. No chapel slot, no floral arrangements, no room for Linda to turn a funeral into a staged performance of grief. Then I stepped into the hospital parking lot. The snow had stopped. The sky over the lot was that pale, washed-out blue that never quite warmed but promised it might. I could see my breath when I called Chase. He didn't answer the first time. Or the second. The third time, his voicemail kicked in, his recorded voice breezy and false-friendly. I hung up and switched to text. Me. Victor's in the hospital. Hypothermic, severely neglected. EMS found the house at 52 degrees. You need to come home. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. A minute later, my phone lit with an incoming video call from his number. I swiped. His face filled the screen. Red from sun, hair wind-tousled, tropical bar behind him. Linda hovered at his shoulder, drink in hand. The younger woman from the Instagram photo giggled somewhere off camera. What now, Riley? He said, slurring the tiniest bit. We're on vacation. The thump of bass and laughter rolled through the tinny speaker. He's dying, I said. My voice was battlefield calm again. He may not have long. You need to come home if you want a chance to say goodbye. Linda's eyes rolled. For God's sake, she snapped. We talked about this. We can't get refunds on these tickets. He's been dying for 2 years, Riley. He's always dramatic. He was sitting in his own urine in a 52-degree house, I said. No food. No morphine. Chase blinked, frowning. We left morphine, he said. You're the medic. Give him more of that. I looked straight into the camera. The bottle is full of tap water, I said. He hasn't had real pain meds in days. A lab is confirming as we speak. This call is being recorded and witnessed. Karen, standing just out of frame in the parking lot, held up her own phone in silent reminder. On the screen, Chase's face flickered. Riley, you're being crazy, he said, volume rising with the bass. We trusted you to handle this. We needed a break. You know how hard it's been on Mom. Linda's mouth thinned. If he dies, she said, you can let us know when we're back. We'll plan something nice. Right now, we are trying to enjoy what time we have that isn't spent cleaning up old man messes. Behind her, the young woman popped into frame, nuzzling Chase's neck. Babe, come on, she whined. We're missing karaoke. We'll talk when you land, I said. I just wanted you to know that you had a choice. I angled the camera toward the hospital doors, then toward the plastic bag in my hand with the empty evidence bottle, then back to my own face. You chose the ship, I said. I chose the valley. Linda scoffed. Chase stared, stuck between defensiveness and something that looked for a split second like fear. Then the image stuttered and he hit end. The screen went black. I stood there in the crisp air, the hospital behind me, the phone warm in my hand. Beside me, Karen exhaled, her breath clouding. Well, she said, they just gave us our timeline. How long until they're back? I asked. 3 days, she said. The cruise website lists their itinerary. 3 days, I repeated. Plenty of time to clean up the battlefield. The wind picked up, dragging a loose flyer across the lot. The flag over the hospital snapped once, sharply in the cold. I tucked my phone into my pocket and closed my fingers around the grocery bag with the morphine bottle. Victor had said, execute the mission. He'd done his part. Now it was my turn. The storm had blown itself out by the time I drove back to the house. The streets were wet black instead of white now. The snow turned to slush piles at the curbs. Streetlights cast long, hazy cones over dirty mounds. My breath still fogged when I stepped out of the truck, but the air had that hollow, post-storm calm. Inside, the house felt different. No Victor's ragged breathing, no ambulance crew. Just the low hum of a furnace finally doing its job and the ghost of what I'd found 24 hours earlier. I turned the thermostat up to 68 and watched the numbers climb like a slow heart rate. Warm air crept from the vents, pushing back the cold that had soaked into the drywall in my bones. Then I went to work. Combat cleaning wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. I stripped the recliner, garbage bagged the ruined cushions, scrubbed the vinyl with hot water and bleach until the worst of the smell eased. I opened windows for 10 brutal minutes, letting fresh cold air flood in, then shut them and let the furnace fight again. In the kitchen, I threw out anything expired, rinsed mold from the crisper drawers, wiped sticky rings where liquor bottles had once sat. The note about the cruise went into a clear sheet protector, then a labeled folder. Evidence, not just insult. I made myself eat something, peanut butter from my bag spread onto stale bread. It tasted like cardboard and determination. At the table, I opened my laptop. Email from Karen was waiting. A scanned copy of the executed amendment, the notarization, and a simple summary. Subject: Harmon Trust, emergency amendment executed. As of 2300 hours, Mr. Harmon's revocable living trust is amended to remove Linda Mitchell and Chase Mitchell as beneficiaries. Name Staff Sergeant Riley Foster as 50% beneficiary and trustee. Allocate remaining 50% to Valor Home Foundation full video and medical capacity verification on file. We are secure, legally speaking. We will need to discuss next steps for notification and enforcement. Karen's secure, legally speaking, I read aloud. Now we just have to deal with the messy part. I pulled up Chase's Instagram again. More cruise shots had gone up in the hour since our call. Him in a lounge chair, cocktail in hand. Linda with a giant straw hat and a frozen drink. Hannah with a caption, "When life gives you lemons, take a cruise." The comments section was full of emojis and "so jealous" and "you guys deserve it." None of them knew what the tickets had really cost. I took screenshots of everything. Timestamps, captions, Osama usernames, the exact times those deserved photos went up while Victor lay shaking in a cold house. Karen had been clear. The more we documented, the less room they'd have to spin. I compiled it all into a folder on my desktop labeled Valley, Receipts, and backed it up to a cloud account they didn't know existed. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The officer on the other end listened quietly as I laid out the bare facts. Neglected elder, extreme hypothermia, clear signs of abandonment, watered-down controlled medication. "Do you want to file a formal report for elder abuse and medication tampering?" he asked. I looked at the plastic bag on the table, empty morphine bottle nested like a fossil. "Yes," I said, "I do." He took down my information, promised a detective would follow up, and told me to keep everything just as it was. I was planning on doing that anyway. The next morning, after the crematorium called to confirm transport and details, I drove to Karen's office. Her building was a 2-story brick box with drafty hallways and a lobby that smelled like coffee, ink, and old carpet. She ushered me into a conference room that felt like a tiny courtroom. Long table, legal books, bland artwork, stern overhead lighting. Victor's portfolio lay open at one end, a box of tissues at the other. "We'll need your signature on a few things now that you're trustee," she said, sliding documents toward me. "Funeral arrangements, distribution preferences, disclaimers for the charity portion." I signed where she pointed, my name neat and controlled next to phrases like sole trustee and full authority. Each stroke of the pen felt like a promise kept to a man who wasn't here to see it. We also need to talk strategy, she said, sitting back. They will come home expecting access, both emotional and financial. She steepled her fingers. You have two options: quiet notification, letting them find out through formal channels, or a direct confrontation where the truth is presented on your terms with witnesses. I thought of Linda staging tears, Chase spinning stories, neighbors seeing only what they wanted. I want no room for revisionist history, I said. No, we didn't know. No, we were on our way back. They knew. They chose. I want them to see exactly what that bought them. Karen nodded once. I figured, she said. Then we use the house. She outlined it like an operation. The urn in the center, the amendment printed and signed, Victor's video cued on the TV, the morphine lab report on the coffee table, the neighbor's written statement ready in a folder. You're good at this, I said. She shrugged. Grew up in a cop's house, she said. Watched my grandmother get swindled and decided that wasn't going to happen to anyone else on my watch. She leaned forward. Riley, this is going to be ugly, she said. They will go through the full cycle: denial, anger, bargaining, blame. You are not responsible for cushioning that. Your job is to hold the line. I thought of holding pressure on a wound while a soldier thrashed and cursed me because it hurt. First day at medic school, I said wryly. Sometimes saving someone means they hate you for a minute. Exactly, she said. She handed me a small velvet box. Victor asked me to give you this, she said. He gave it to me at our last standing meeting, said, if I don't get the chance, you make sure my girl gets this. I told him he'd have the chance. I was wrong. My fingers trembled as I opened the lid. A heavy gold Marine Corps signet ring nestled inside, worn smooth on the edges, the emblem still crisp. His, the one he'd worn every time he'd wrap my knuckles with it over a missed budgeting line. A lump rose in my throat. He said you'd know what to do with it, she added softly. I slid the ring onto a chain I pulled from my pocket. A spare dog tag chain I kept there from habit more than anything. The metal was cold against my skin as I dropped it under my shirt, resting beside my tags. Yeah, I said, I do. The next 48 hours were a blur of practicalities and grim choreography. I packed my things from the upstairs bedroom into duffel bags, stacked them by the front door. I washed Victor's clothes, folded them into a box for donation, keeping only a sweater that still smelled faintly like coffee and Old Spice. I picked up the simple brass urn from the crematorium, surprisingly heavy for something so small, and carried it into the house with more reverence than I'd ever carried a rucksack. I set it on the coffee table, centered. Then I staged the rest. The morphine bottle, now cleaned and sealed in a police evidence bag, sat next to a printed lab report confirming its contents. H2O and traces of residual narcotic, nothing close to dosage. Next to that, a folder labeled Bank Statements showed the joint account Chase had emptied, highlighted withdrawals lining up perfectly with cruise line and casino charges. The tablet on the TV stand was cued to Victor's recorded statement. The time bar paused at the exact frame where he looked into the camera and said intentionally nothing. On the side table, my own folder. Screenshots of texts, the Instagram posts, Mrs. Clark's signed statement, Dr. Anders's note documenting his concerns, and Linda's refusals. The house was warm now. Smelled like lemon cleaner and something more faintly human. Coffee, my shampoo, the ghost of Victor's aftershave still clinging to the fibers. I walked through it one last time as if it were a crime scene walkthrough. Front door, sight lines, where they would first see the urn, where their eyes would fall next, how long it would take before they noticed my uniform. Because that was the final piece. The morning their cruise was due back, I stood in the upstairs bathroom, fingers steady as I buttoned my Army service uniform coat. The dark fabric felt snug but familiar across my shoulders, the rows of ribbons and badges catching light when I moved. I smoothed my hair back into a regulation bun, secured it, checked my face. Not much sleep. No makeup beyond concealer and a firm set to my mouth. My tags and Victor's ring lay cold and heavy against my collarbone, under the blouse. Steel and gold, service and legacy sharing the same chain. Downstairs, I straightened the items on the coffee table one more time, wiped an invisible smudge from the urn, and took my place in the armchair opposite the front door, hands folded in my lap. The house hummed softly. Outside, a car engine grew louder, tires crunching over the residual snow. Doors slammed. Laughter, sunburned, unaware, floated toward the porch. The knob rattled. The door swung open. Chase burst in first, tanned and grinning, dragging a rolling suitcase. Hannah stumbled behind him, sunglasses on top of her head, phone in hand. Linda followed, skin the leathery brown of a fast tan, wheeled carry-on, bumping over the threshold. "Man, it is freezing in here," Chase said, shivering theatrically, even as the warm air hit him. "Riley better have y—" He stopped dead. 3 sets of eyes snapped to the coffee table, to the urn, then to me. I watched the exact moment their vacation ended and reality dropped like a stone. "Welcome home," I said, voice calm, uniform creasing perfectly as I rose. This wasn't a living room anymore. It was a courtroom, and I was done playing defense. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The furnace hummed. A drip somewhere in the kitchen ticked into the sink. The only sound from the 3 of them was their sudden, sharp breathing. Hannah's rolling suitcase bumped gently against the back of Chase's calves, then settled. He looked from the urn to my uniform to the stage table and back again. "What?" he started, voice cracking. "What is this?" Linda's eyes were wide and wet, but it was the high, startled kind of wet, not grief. She clutched her purse strap until her knuckles blanched. "Why is it hot in here?" she said wildly. Why is the heat on? Where's my husband?" I let the silence stretch 1 second longer than was comfortable. "Victor died last night," I said. "He was cremated this morning." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. Chase flinched as if I'd slapped him. "What?" Linda screamed. No, that's not... Why wasn't I called? Why didn't anyone... You were called," I said. "Multiple times, by me, by the hospital. You chose not to come home." Her lips trembled, her eyes darted toward the front door, maybe checking for an audience that wasn't there. "We were on a ship," she snapped. "There's bad reception. They said calls were expensive. You should have..." "I did," I cut in. 3 times, then I switched to video so you could see exactly what you were choosing. I lifted my phone, thumbed to the saved recording, and tapped play. Our earlier call filled the room. Cruise bar noise, my own steady voice, Linda's dismissive tone. "If he dies, you can let us know when we're back." Chase is recorded, "Just give him more morphine," echoed off the walls. In front of me, their living faces registered the words differently this time. No sun, no drinks, no music to drown out the wait. Hannah paled. "Chase," she whispered, horrified. "You said he was fine. You said—" "Shut up," he hissed. He turned back to me, eyes bloodshot from sun and booze. "You had no right to cremate him without us," he snarled. "He's my stepfather. That's my family. You don't get to decide that alone." I took 1 step closer to the coffee table, letting the brass urn catch a line of weak winter light. "I followed his wishes," I said. "Direct cremation, no theatrics, no performance funeral. The paperwork is signed. The death certificate is processed. Legally, it's done." I gestured to the armchair across from me. "Sit," I said. "All of you, we have things to go over." The command in my voice came straight from the field. Chase opened his mouth to argue, then saw the morphine evidence bag on the table and shut it again. Linda shuffled to the couch, legs wobbling, Hannah sinking beside her. Chase stayed standing a second longer, breathing hard, then dropped into the remaining chair like his knees gave out. The rolling suitcase tipped over and slowly toppled, wheels squeaking as it hit the rug. "Victor asked for 2 things before he died," I said. "Comfort and clarity." I met Linda's eyes. "You denied him one," I continued. "He took care of the other." She flushed a blotchy red. "That's not fair," she snapped. "I gave up my life for that man. I was trapped. You waltzed in for holidays and played the hero." "You gave up nothing," I said quietly. "You took his heat, his food, and his meds, and you spent my deployment savings on umbrella drinks." Hannah shifted. "What do you mean your—" "Savings?" she asked, voice small. I reached for the folder labeled Bank Statements, flipped it open, and slid the top page into view. "This is our joint account," I said to Chase. "The one we agreed was for the new roof and emergencies, funded mainly by combat pay and my re-enlistment bonus." Highlighted withdrawals glared up from the page: casino, cruise line, resort, bar. 14,000, I said. "Gone in 6 weeks, lined up perfectly with your little blessed posts." Chase's pupils shrank. "I was going to replace it," he said. "You know how it is, babe. You double down, you make it back. The cruise was a reset. We needed to blow off steam." "So you blew off your stepfather's last days instead," I said. The furnace kicked on again with a low clunk. Warm air slipped out of the vents, brushing my ankles. I picked up the evidence bag. The clear liquid caught the light. "This was supposed to be morphine," I said. "Do you know what it is?" Chase swallowed. "Medicine," he muttered. "We left him medicine. It's water," I said. "Dr. Anders sent it to the lab. They ran the tests. There's barely a fingerprint of narcotic left in it. Someone poured this down the drain and refilled it from the tap." My gaze slid to Linda. She stared at the bag, face white now, lipstick a sharp, ugly slash. That's ridiculous," she said. "You can't. Maybe the pharmacy. Pharmacies don't water down controlled meds," I said. "People do. People who want to save a buck and still blame the pain on the disease." Her mouth opened and closed. Tears finally spilled. Real ones, I thought, laced with fear instead of whatever she'd planned to elicit at a funeral. Chase shifted in his seat, fingers digging into the armrests. "You're twisting everything," he said. "You've always hated Mom. You think you're better because you wear a uniform. You love playing soldier in our lives." I lifted my hand. "Stop," I said. "This isn't about me playing anything. This is about what you did when you thought no one was watching." I tapped the folder again. "And what he did to make sure someone was." I picked up the tablet from the TV stand and set it on the table, screen facing them. Victor's face filled the frame. Tired, wan, but unmistakably himself. The timestamp glowed in the corner. The night before, just after midnight. I hit play. "Linda," his recorded voice said, rough but clear. "Chase, if you're hearing this, I'm either gone or close." Linda gasped. Chase leaned forward involuntarily. "You left me," Victor went on. "You left me in a cold house with no meds, no heat, and no food. You left me to die so you could drink on a ship you paid for with her money." The camera shifted just enough to show my shoulder in uniform. "And with mine." He coughed, eyes closing briefly, then opened them again, hard. "I owe you nothing," he said. "Not my comfort, not my forgiveness, not my estate." Linda clapped a hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. "This is my decision," Victor said. "While I am of sound mind, Karen is here, the doctor is here, Riley is here. She showed up when you wouldn't. She gets 50%, and the house. The rest goes to people who didn't forget what service means." He drew a ragged breath. "You are my wife in name and law," he said quietly, "but she is my daughter, in the ways that mattered." He looked square into the camera, threw it into the space where they sat now. "I'm not doing this to punish you," he said. "I'm doing it to protect what's left of me from who you chose to become." The video ended with a faint smile toward me and a muttered, "Execute the mission." The screen went black. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint whoosh of the furnace and Hannah's shallow breathing. Finally, Linda whispered, "He changed the will?" "He amended his trust," I said. "Legally, cleanly, on video with medical verification. You and Chase have been removed as beneficiaries." Chase exploded out of his chair. "You can't just," he shouted. "You can't cut us out like that. That's manipulation. Undue influence. You got your claws into him." "Sit down," I said. He froze, shocked at my tone. Years of following orders dragged his body back into the chair before his brain could object. "This wasn't my idea," I said. "Victor talked to Karen about this months ago. He held off because he hoped you weren't as bad as he feared." I let the next sentence drop like a stone. You convinced him otherwise. He flinched. Besides, I added, if you want to claim he was too confused to make that decision, you should know what you're actually admitting. I tapped the evidence bag. An impaired, vulnerable adult with deliberately watered medicine, left alone in a cold house with no food and no caregiver, while his legal next of kin took a luxury cruise, I said. That's not just a bad look, that's criminal. Linda's eyes widened. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying the police have this bottle, I replied. With the lab report, with Dr. Anders's concerns documented, with Mrs. Clark's statement about watching you drive away with suitcases and a stranger and seeing no one come to check on him. I held up my phone, the screenshot of Hannah's cruise post glowing accusingly. I'm saying there's a time-stamped trail of your choices, I said. And if you try to contest Victor's amendment, all of it becomes part of the record, in probate, in any criminal proceedings, elder abuse, neglect, tampering with controlled substances. The word hung in the air like a thunderhead. Criminal. Hannah's face had gone snow-pale. She stood abruptly, hands shaking. I didn't know, she stammered. He said his stepdad had nurses, that his wife. I wouldn't have. I believe you, I said. And I did. This isn't about you. This is about the two people who did know and chose the bar over the bedside. She grabbed her suitcase, eyes darting between us and back toward the door. I'm going to get a ride, she said. I'm sorry for your loss. Then she fled. Boots clattering down the front steps, cold air rushing in for a second before the door swung shut behind her. Silence settled heavy. Linda sagged back into the couch, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Chase stared at the urn like it might leap up and bite him. What happens now? He managed, voice hoarse. Now, I thought. Now we cut the last tie that looks like marriage and feels like shackles. I reached up, fingers finding the cold circle of my wedding band. What happens now, I said, sliding it off, is that we stop pretending any of this is salvageable. The ring sat in my palm like a tiny planet for a heartbeat. Then I closed my fist around it and felt the next phase of the mission settle into place as the gold bit into my palm. For a second, I just stood there, feeling the ridges of the ring press into skin that had held it for years. The silence in the room thickened, furnace humming, urn gleaming in the middle of the coffee table like a quiet witness. Chase stared at my hand. What are you doing? He asked. His voice had gone small, boyish, the bravado stripped away. I opened my fingers. The ring sat in my palm, next to the slimmer band I slid off my other hand. I'm discharging myself, I said. From a marriage where you go AWOL when it counts. I didn't throw them yet. Not inside, not in front of the urn. Some things deserved clean ground. You can't, he started, then stopped, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. I can, I said, and I am. Linda's shoulders shook with a fresh wave of tears. You'd blow up your whole life over this? She choked. Over a misunderstanding? I let out a short, humorless breath. This isn't about one cruise, I said. This is about a pattern. You leave when things are hard. You let me handle the mess. You tell yourself I like it because I'm good at it. I gestured to the evidence spread across the table. I handled it, I said. Now there are consequences. I reached into my folder and pulled out one more document, a printed notice Karen had prepared at my request. Effective immediately, I said, laying it beside the urn. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from this house. Chase blinked. Excuse me? He said. This house, I repeated, voice flat, is now owned by the Harmon Trust, of which I'm trustee. You have no legal right to remain here. You are a guest at best, a trespasser at worst. Consider this your written notice. Oh. I slid a copy across the table to both of them. You can sleep here tonight, I added. You can pack, but by tomorrow at this time, your keys will stop working. Linda stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. You wouldn't, she whispered. You can't throw your husband out into the snow. I took you in. I let you live here, huh? You took my money, I said. You used my labor. Victor took me in. Victor shared this home. You tried to turn it into a prison for him. I'm turning it back into a refuge, just not for you. Chase's jaw worked. You're emotional, he said. You just lost someone. You're not thinking straight. We can talk about this in a few days. I have never thought more clearly, I said. He surged to his feet, pacing the length of the rug like a caged animal. What about us? He demanded, flinging an arm between us. What about everything we've been through? You're really going to throw away a marriage over a vacation? I stepped around the coffee table, urn between us, and stood close enough that I could see the sweat bead at his temples. That wasn't a vacation, I said. That was desertion. The word landed between us with military weight. You left your post, I went on, voice low. You left your responsibilities. You left your dying stepfather. And me. You used the money I bled for to fund it. You watered down his meds. Or you watched it happen and did nothing. Either way, Chase, you are not someone I can trust to be on my flank when the rounds start flying. He flinched like I'd struck him. I didn't water anything down, he muttered. Then you handed the bottle to someone who did and never checked, I said. Same outcome. His mouth opened, closed. He glanced at Linda as if searching for backup. She stared down at the papers in her hands, mascara trails drying on her cheeks. I didn't, she whispered. I didn't think he'd go that fast. He's been sick for so long. I was so tired. I just wanted 1 week where nobody needed me. I believed that part in a way. I'd seen what caregiving did to people who were never taught how to build a support system, only how to perform martyrdom. But believing the feeling didn't excuse the choice. Then you hire help, I said. You ask for respite care, you get a neighbor to check in. You don't turn down his meds and turn off the heat and use "I'm tired" as an excuse while you order another round. Her shoulders caved in. I made a mistake, she whispered. No, I said. You made a series of decisions, so did Chase. And now you get a series of consequences. I moved toward the door, the ring still in my hand, my boots soft on the carpet. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. The front yard was a patchwork of crusted snow and exposed grass, the sky low and gray. I stepped off the porch, down onto the frozen lawn, feeling the ground crunch under my soles. Behind me, through the open door, I could feel their eyes on my back. I opened my hand again, the 2 rings gleaming dully in the flat light. These, I said, more to myself than to them, were supposed to mean we had each other's backs. I thought of Victor's ring, warm now from my skin, resting against my chest. I thought of him shivering in that chair. I thought of Chase's laughter on the cruise video while I held a washcloth to a dying man's face. I drew my arm back and flicked my wrist. The rings arced through the air, catching a brief glint of light, then disappeared into the snowbank at the edge of the yard with a soft, final hiss. The sound of metal hitting ice was small. The shift inside me was not. When I turned back, Chase was standing in the doorway, face thunderstruck. You're throwing away our marriage, he said flatly. No, I said. You did that when you left. I'm just making it official. I stepped past him into the house long enough to grab my duffel bags from the foyer and sling them over my shoulder. Linda looked up from the couch, dazed. Where will you go? She asked faintly. I thought of all the soldiers I'd sent home with discharge papers and nowhere to land. I thought of the little duplex I still technically rented near Post, the one that smelled like bleach and stale coffee and didn't have any ghosts yet. Somewhere warm, I said. Somewhere honest. I paused, hand on the doorknob. For what it's worth, I added, Victor didn't want you in jail. He just wanted you out of his estate. Cooperate with Karen. Don't try to contest, and for your own sake, tell the truth when the detective calls. It'll go better if you do. Linda nodded jerkily, eyes fixed on the urn. Chase stared at the empty spot on my finger where the ring had been. You'll regret this, he said. But there was no heat in it now. It sounded like something he'd heard in a movie and didn't quite believe himself. I stepped onto the porch, the doorframe rough under my palm. No, I said. For the first time in a long time, I don't think I will. I let the door close behind me with a quiet, final click. The cold bit into my cheeks as I crossed the yard to my truck, breath fogging in small, controlled bursts. Over the roofline, the sky was cracking open, a thin band of pale blue showing at the horizon. I tossed my duffels into the cab, climbed in, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Victor's ring pressed against my sternum. My phone buzzed once, a voicemail notification, but I let it go dark. On the seat beside me, my folder of receipts lay like a mission packet after a successful op. Heavy, thick, undeniable. I put the truck in gear. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house sat there, warm now, smoke curling faintly from the chimney, but it didn't look like mine anymore. It looked like a case file that had been closed. Not with justice in every direction, that was impossible, but with justice enough to honor the only man in it who'd earned the word. Ahead, the road curved toward town, then the highway, then whatever came after. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the ache of the last 72 hours settle into muscle. The storm had already passed. Now came the part I hadn't let myself imagine yet, deciding what to build with what was left. I didn't cry until 3 weeks later, standing in mud with a shovel in my hands. Up to that point, everything had been movement and paperwork. Karen filed the trust notices. The detective took my statement, logged the morphine bottle, thanked me for not looking the other way. Chase and Linda packed and left the house within the 24 hours I'd given them, backs curved, suitcases rattling down the front steps like a slow retreat. They didn't contest the amendment. I don't know if it was Karen's warning, the lab report, or Victor's video that did it. Maybe all three. Maybe even they understood that dragging this into court would shine a light they couldn't survive. I moved out of the house as soon as the sale closed, signed the last stack of papers with Karen in a quiet office that smelled like coffee and old books, wired half the proceeds to the Valor Home Foundation, and watched the trust balance adjust like a heartbeat shifting into a steadier rhythm. Then I drove 2 hours into the hills with the folder in the passenger seat and Victor's ring warm against my chest. The property had been his last what if, a little plot he'd bought cheap years earlier with a half-collapsed barn and a stubborn creek running along one edge. I'd seen it once on a drive when he'd pointed and said, "That's where I'd go if I ever got my head on straight about retiring." Now it was mine to do something with. The first time I stepped out of the truck, the cold hit my lungs with the clean bite of pine and wet earth instead of bleach and neglected dust. The barn leaned, groaning, but it was still standing. The creek gurgled under a thin skin of ice, invisible but insistent. The air smelled like mud and wood smoke from some distant farmhouse chimney. Birds flitted in the skeletal trees, wings a quick rustle. I stood there, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, and just breathed. No thermostat, no machines, no raised voices, just space. I used part of the trust to shore up the barn, hire a local contractor to run power, and pour foundations for 3 simple cabins along the creek. Nothing fancy, just sturdy structures with good insulation, wide porches, and wood stoves. Retreat, Victor had always said, wasn't about luxury. It's about a place where people can breathe without checking over their shoulder every 5 seconds. I called it Valley Rest on the paperwork. Karen raised an eyebrow at the name but signed the registration with a small smile. "On the nose," she said, "but it fits." We started small. Valor Home sent 2 caregivers on the edge of burnout who needed a week away from machines and hospital beeps. I met them in my dress uniform the first time they pulled up, out of reflex, then realized what they needed wasn't rank. So the next time I wore jeans and a sweatshirt that smelled like wood smoke and coffee. I made chili on the old stove from Victor's house, the one no one had bothered to replace because they were too busy spending his pension on things that didn't smell like anything real. The pot simmered all afternoon, filling the cabin with a low, steady warmth. At night, lying in the loft bed listening to the stove tick as it cooled and the creek murmur through the dark, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not safe exactly, once you've heard rounds cracking overhead. Safe never feels the same, but unobserved, unassigned, like I didn't have to be on call for someone else's crisis every second. The shovel came into play on my first free weekend. I'd brought the urn to the property in the passenger seat, strapped in with the seatbelt because habits die hard and I'd spent too long making sure he didn't fall. There was a little rise near the bend in the creek under a cluster of sycamores. The bark peeled in pale curls that rustled when the wind shifted like old paper letting go. I stuck the shovel into the ground. The soil was cold and heavy, thawed just enough to give. Each lift smelled like wet leaves and iron. By the time the hole was deep enough, my arms burned pleasantly. I set the urn inside, my fingers lingering on the smooth brass. Not the prettiest plot, I said aloud, but it's got good runoff. The creek chuckled in the background. And good ROI, I added. You'd approve of the balance sheet. The joke broke something in my chest. The tears came fast, hot and humiliating, blurring the urn, the hole, the trees. I bent over, elbows on my knees, shovel handle digging into my ribs, and let it happen. Not quietly. Not prettily. The last time I'd cried this hard had been in a plywood aid station in a different valley. Sand instead of mud. Dust instead of mist. A young private bleeding out under my hands. Back then, I'd stuffed my face into a towel and bit down because sound traveled in thin walls and I didn't want to spook my squad. Here, nobody was listening but birds and water. So I let the ugly sobs tear through me until they turned into hiccups and harsh breaths and finally, a low, rough laugh. I did it, I said, voice wrecked. We did it! We got you out! Leaves rustled overhead like an answer. I shoveled the dirt back in, tamped it down, and stacked flat rocks over the spot, my hands numb and filthy. No headstone yet. Just wait. I rested my palm on the top rock, cold and rough. I know you said don't let hate take root, I whispered. I'm trying, but I'm not going to pretend they didn't earn what they got. The wind picked up briefly, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from the cabin stove. I took that as an answer, too. News of Victor's death reached Chase's side of the family through whatever channels gossip used when it ran out of fuel. I didn't get the details. I didn't need them. A letter from the detective arrived 2 months later. The morphine tampering had been formally logged. Linda had accepted a plea deal for neglect and tampering with a controlled substance, probation, and mandatory counseling instead of a trial. Chase had been named in the report as complicit in abandonment, but avoided charges by cooperating. I read the letter at my small kitchen table in the cabin, the smell of coffee rising from my mug, then folded it carefully and slid it into the valley. Receipts folder. Justice as far as the system could give it. Not enough to fix the months Victor spent cold and alone. Enough to mark that they weren't just overwhelmed caregivers in the eyes of the law. I didn't call them. They didn't call me. Eventually, people stopped asking why I'd sold the old house. They started asking when I'd have more cabins available at Valley Rest. When I drove back to Post for drill and paperwork, my battle buddies asked where I'd been, and I told them, building something in a valley. They nodded like they understood. Some did. Some just heard land and silence, and filed it away for when they might need it too. On quiet evenings, Victor's ring was a familiar weight against my sternum, warm from skin. Sometimes I'd press my thumb against it through the fabric when I had to make a hard call. About money, about guests, about who I let into my circle and who I kept at the gate. It became a kind of yes/no coin flip, except I already knew the answers. Does this choice honor the man who sat in the cold and still worried about everyone else's comfort? Does it honor the girl who finally chose her own? Months slid by. Spring crept up the hillside, shy and insistent. The sycamores budded. Green pushed through the mud in coil after coil. The creek ran higher, louder, melting snow swelling its voice. I hosted our first official rest week. 2 wives who'd been caring for wounded vets far from any base, their eyes ringed with exhaustion, their hands chapped from too many hospital-grade soaps. They arrived stiff, polite, brittle. By the second night, they were in sweatpants on the cabin porch, cradling mugs of tea, talking over each other about medication schedules and resentment and love and fear in the same breath. You're the first person who's made me feel like I wasn't crazy, one said, blinking away tears. Or ungrateful, or faceless, failing. I shrugged, felt my own throat tighten. You're not failing, I said. You're just carrying more than you were ever meant to carry alone. She stared at the dark slope behind me where a little mound of rock sat faintly outlined in the moonlight. Is that? She started. Yeah, I said. That's him. She nodded. I'm sorry, she murmured. Me too, I said. But he's not cold anymore. That night, lying in my own cabin with the window cracked open to let in the smell of wet earth and the sound of the creek, I realized my breathing had synced to the water's rhythm, not a monitor's. I slept without dreams of the freezing house for the first time. The last piece slid into place on an ordinary Tuesday. I was at the big table in the main cabin, sorting receipts and grant applications, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Foster? I answered. A hesitant male voice came through, thinner than I remembered, but familiar enough to make my stomach clench. Riley, Chase said. It's me. I pressed my tongue to the back of my teeth, tasted coffee and old anger. I know, I said. What do you need? A long exhale rustled the speaker. I got a card from Valor Home, he said, about a donation in Victor's name. And the detective said that you didn't push for jail. That you let Mom take the deal. The silence on the line felt like the pause before a needle going in. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he finished, voice cracking. For all of it. For leaving, for the money, for letting you do everything and still resenting you for it. The old version of me would have filled that silence with reassurance, excuses, shared blame. The new one didn't. I believe you're sorry, I said finally. I also believe the only apology Victor needed came too late. And the only apology that matters to me is the one you back up with a different life. I know, he said quickly. I'm in a program, financial counseling, group for caregivers who messed up. The detective said I should face what I did, not just what I lost. I just wanted you to know I'm not pretending I didn't screw up. I watched a shaft of sun fall across the table, lighting up the wood grain where Victor's old thermos now sat like a permanent fixture. Good, I said. That's something. Could I... Maybe... He hesitated. Could I come out there sometime? To... the place? To... I don't know. See what you built? Say goodbye? He loved valleys, you know? I closed my eyes for a moment. The idea of Chase on this ground made my shoulders tense. The idea of him standing by those rocks with anything like genuine remorse loosened something. Not now, I said. Maybe someday. When I believe it's about him, not about you feeling better. He swallowed audibly. Okay, he said. I'll wait, for whatever that's worth. It's worth more than another cruise, I said, and felt his wince through the line. We hung up with no promises, only the faintest outline of a future, where we might stand in the same valley without me reaching for a folder of receipts. I set the phone down, flexed my hand. The ring under my shirt pressed into my skin, as I took a breath that didn't feel jagged. Outside, 2 of the retreat guests laughed. Real, whole, startled laughter that floated up through the open window like birds taking off. I stood, walked to the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled like wet wood and coffee. The creek whispered. A woodpecker hammered somewhere up the slope. I reached up, fingers brushing the chain at my throat. Mission complete, old man, I said softly. On to the next. Because that was the quiet truth I'd landed on, kneeling in the mud over his grave and later at my own tiny kitchen table with spreadsheets and grant forms. Betrayal had launched the mission. Anger had fueled the first steps. But what kept me going wasn't the urge to punish Chase and Linda. It was the stubborn, simple refusal to let what they did be the last word. Victor had chosen me to carry more than his money. He'd trusted me to carry his standard. That loyalty shows in who sits with you in the cold and hut. And honor is what you do when nobody's staging photos. I couldn't fix everything they'd broken. I could build something that didn't look anything like them. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the cabins, boots squelching softly in the damp earth, valley air filling my lungs. Somewhere between the creek's steady murmur and the sound of tired caregivers laughing, like they hadn't laughed in years, I felt the old weight of other people's choices slide off my shoulders and land where it belonged. Behind me, I hadn't chosen my blood, but I'd chosen my duty. And from that day on, I chose my family the same way, one act of loyalty at a time.